The first thing I'd like to talk to you about is Hinkley and where things are at with Hinkley. So there's still no final investment decision for Hinkley. Hinkley's share price, or EDF's share price, is plummeting. Yay! The cost of Hinkley in terms of capital investment is more than EDF is actually worth. And if built at the current price, it would be the single most expensive object on the face of the planet. Not something to brag about. The good news is, I heard today, that EDF have now said that they will not go ahead with Hinkley without funding from the French government. So we certainly hadn't ought to be complacent from that. And so one of the things I wanted to address today is, I'm sure you all follow these issues in the media, when and if they appear in the media, and right now the media's voice is starting to turn on the Hinkley project. Now, the issues that the media are turning on are the issues of economics, these issues that we're winning those arguments right now. But I'd like to point out something that was pointed out to me by the Heinrich Boll Stiftung Foundation of Germany, which said one of the nuclear industry's cleverest achievements is moving the public conversation away from safety and onto issues such as climate change and energy security and those issues. Now, the way that the arguments are turning at the moment might help us win the battle against Hinkley, but they're certainly not going to help us win the war against nuclear power. In Japan, 70% of the public are opposed to nuclear power, and yet they have a pro-nuclear government. How is that in a democracy? I don't quite understand that. It doesn't really reflect the will of the people. And to me, it demonstrates the long tentacles of the industry. And that kind of brings me to the recent Greenpeace report that's just come out in the last few days, called Radiation Reloaded. I know, because I've been thinking to myself over the last few weeks about what I'd like to talk about here, and the things that we always end up talking about, because the media seem to control the conversation, is we talk about the money and we talk about energy security and those things, and very rarely do we actually talk about the safety, because we've got the likes of Geraldine Thomas, I hope she pays for what she says, telling people lies, corporate lies. That woman was put forward by BBC as being a world authority on radiation, and she's shamelessly cheerleaded for this industry, and I hope she pays for what she says. 5 years into the incident, Greenpeace have been monitoring various sites around Fukushima Prefecture. And I haven't finished having a look at it yet. It's a big long report. I've just been looking at the executive summary, and I just wanted to point out some of the highlights for that, some things that I learned. So one of the things is, a really common tree in Japan is the Japanese cedar, and that tree is particularly vulnerable to radiation. It will concentrate radiocesium in its heartwood, and currently the only place where exporting of that timber is banned is inside the exclusion zone, and yet there are plenty of trees in contaminated areas outside of the exclusion zone. The Japanese fir tree is already showing morphological defects. It's got missing leader shoots, and obviously these sort of mutations can exist anyway, as the nuclear industry would be quick to tell you. But the missing leader shoots in Fukushima are definitely linked to Fukushima's emissions. The incidences of abnormality increase with the levels of radiation. Nuclear accidents have a negative effect on decomposers. You know, all those lovely little worms and creepy crawlies that like to break down our compost for us? Composting stops happening, and this is why we've had really big forest fires in Chernobyl. And I hadn't realised this. I hadn't realised that the Ukraine wasn't just subject to forest fires anyway. One of the reasons that Chernobyl is having such bad forest fires is because of the accumulation of litter, of leaf litter. The leaves aren't decomposing because the decomposers are dead, and so they're building up and then becoming a fire hazard. In Fukushima, although it's a wetter climate than Chernobyl, in 2014 there were 53 wildfires, and it's the fir trees at the foothills of Fukushima that are most at risk. Now, I mentioned before that the only way that we're going to win the war against nuclear power is by starting to bring the public conversation back to the issue of safety. And so I've been wondering about that, because that conversation here in the UK seems to have been stalled. And I don't know who of you here are able to remember, but under a previous Labour government there was a committee called the Cherry Committee, and that committee was charged with the task of looking at the health impacts of nuclear power. Michael Meacher, the late Michael Meacher, he was the Environment Secretary at the time, and he set up that committee. It descended into chaos because the nuclear industry experts didn't agree with the independent experts, and so we got no further forward. And what there has been in Europe for some time is an alternative model that claims to better represent the facts as they happen on the ground. So the ECRR model, the European Committee on Radiation Risk, claims to have a better fit for its model for the fallout from Chernobyl and from Fukushima. But the people who are the proponents of this model, people like Chris Busby, get rubbished by the government and attacked by the industry. People are exposed without really knowing the risks that they face. The propaganda and the lies are so strong that people don't know what they're getting into. People in my community approach me and say, do you know what, my husband, he's a worker, and he goes around all the different sites doing the cleanup, and he does it because we need the money, but we don't like it. We think it's really bad. And yet the workers can't speak out. In Cumbria, they had a fund. They had a fund there for compensation for the workers that was started up by Cumbrians opposed to a radioactive environment. Very quickly the industry got involved and set up its own compensation scheme, and the workers are too scared to claim it. They're too scared to speak out. They're all worried about their job, they're all worried about their communities, and so they don't speak out through fear. We have to somehow help the people in these industries to get past that. And we have, the defence sector and the aviation sector, for example, within Unite or within the GMB, are small sectors compared to the rest of their manufacturing bases, and yet these bases hold so much sway over the unions. And why is that? So I just asked that question.